We don't always know what the breaking point looks like while it's happening. Sometimes it's just a chair scraping back, a plate cooling untouched, a room that suddenly feels like it's choosing sides. Margot Sinclair's story starts there at the exact moment her own home decided she didn't belong in it anymore. Not because she was helpless, but because the people who raised her couldn't recognize a life they didn't approve of. This is where she starts. I was halfway through dinner when I realized nobody was hungry. My fork hovered over the mashed potatoes, and my mother's hands stayed folded in her lap like she was trying to make herself smaller. My father sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, eyes fixed on me like I was a problem he'd finally decided to solve. My sister Lauren cleared her throat and stared at her water glass. She didn't look at me once. Dad leaned forward, palms flat on the wood. "You're still doing that laptop thing." I nodded once. Not a big nod. Just enough to keep the peace. "Yeah. Work's busy." He made a sound like a laugh that didn't reach his face. "Work. You call that work." Mom's voice came out soft. "Thomas, please." He didn't even glance at her. She's in her 30s, and she can't explain what she does without sounding like she's selling something. My stomach tightened. I'm not selling anything. I build software. For who? He flicked his fingers at the air. Impatient. For strangers on the internet? It's not... I stopped, took a breath. It's business software. Companies use it. Lauren shifted in her chair. Dad, maybe just let her eat. He turned on her fast, like she'd betrayed him by offering me a life raft. Don't start. You want to coddle her. You can do it at your place. I felt my face heat. Not from shame, exactly. From that old, familiar sensation of being 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen, waiting for my good grades to turn into something like approval. Dad's voice dropped lower. I'm done pretending this is a phase. If you're so determined to chase this fantasy, then pack your things and go live in the streets like the losers you admire. The words landed heavy, concrete heavy. Mom's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes stayed on the table, as if the grain in the wood could give her an escape route. I stared at my plate until the edges blurred. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My heart wasn't. Dad pushed his chair back. This house isn't your safety net. My throat tightened. I'm not asking it to be. Good, he snapped, because you're not staying here. Not another night. You want independence. You get the whole thing. Bills, consequences, reality. I stood up slowly, napkin still on my lap. My voice came out quiet. Okay. Lauren's head jerked toward me. Mom's eyes finally lifted, glassy and scared. Dad's mouth twitched like he expected me to beg. When I didn't. His face hardened. Take your bag and go. I walked to the hallway, grabbed the overnight bag I'd packed earlier more out of habit than planning, and slipped my feet into my shoes. We've seen a lot of family stories, and the moment someone stops arguing is usually when the room starts to panic. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The air was cold enough to bite. Behind me, nobody followed. No one called my name. The porch light clicked off before I reached the walkway. Not an accident. A choice. I kept walking anyway. If you've been carrying a story like this in silence, you're welcome to leave a comment when you're ready. I'll be reading them later, when my hands stop shaking. I didn't get into the car right away. I stood by the driver's door with the key in my hand, staring at the house like it might say something if I waited long enough. The windows were dark. No movement. The place looked smaller from the driveway, like it had already decided to forget me. I opened the door and tossed my bag onto the passenger seat. It landed heavier than it should have. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, thumbs pressed into the worn leather, breathing slow so I wouldn't do anything stupid. Cry, yell, go back and knock. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Just 3 words, drive safe. Margot. Nothing else. I didn't answer. The engine started on the first turn, which felt unfair. The radio came on low. Some ad I didn't recognize. I turned it off and pulled onto the road, tires crunching over gravel, then pavement. I made it 2 miles before my chest tightened. I pulled over, hazards on, forehead resting against the wheel. My breath came out sharp, then shaky. I let it happen for a few seconds. Not long. Just enough to acknowledge it. Then I tapped my screen and called Isabel. She answered on the second ring. "Hey." Her voice did it. That was the crack. He told me to leave. I managed, actually leave. There was a pause on her end. Not the kind where someone doesn't know what to say. The kind where they're choosing the right thing. "Where are you right now?" "On the road. Still in Oregon?" "Good. Keep driving." I sniffed and wiped my face with my sleeve. He thinks I'm delusional. Like I'm pretending at a job. Isabel exhaled. "Margot, they didn't throw you out because you failed." I didn't answer. "They threw you out because your life doesn't fit the version they're comfortable with." That landed harder than his words had. We've listened to a lot of stories like this, and there's always a moment when the shame starts loosening its grip. Just a little. I stared out at the dark fields beyond the shoulder. I didn't even argue. "Good," she said gently. "You don't owe them a performance." I started the car again. The road stretched ahead, empty and steady. "I'll stay with you for a bit," Isabel added. "Just drive." So I did. I pulled into my building in Austin just before dawn. The garage gate lifted slow, like it was thinking about it, and I sat there blinking at the concrete wall until it finished. My badge worked on the first try. That felt like a small mercy. Inside the apartment, everything was where I'd left it. Shoes by the door, a mug in the sink, the plant I kept forgetting to water, somehow still alive. I dropped my bag on the floor and stood there, jacket still on, letting the quiet settle. My phone buzzed again. Isabel hadn't hung up. She'd stayed on the line the whole drive, breathing with me, filling the silence when it got too heavy. "I'm home," I told her. "Good," she replied. "Sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a lot." Tomorrow. Right. I hung up and moved to the window. The city was waking up, a few lights on in other buildings. Someone jogging with headphones in. Normal life continuing, unaware that my parents' house had just closed its door on me. I showered, changed, and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. Habit more than urgency. My inbox was already moving. Messages from the team. A calendar reminder for a legal review later that morning. A note from our head of product about a late-night fix in Europe that had gone smoothly. This was the version of me my family never asked about. At the office a few hours later, the receptionist looked up and smiled. "Morning. Margot. Morning." The elevator was crowded with people holding coffee, talking about weekend plans, deployment timelines, a new client onboarding. Someone laughed. Someone complained about the air conditioning. I stepped into my office and set my bag down. The whiteboard still had half-erased notes from last week, timelines, launch dates, a big box in the corner labeled Public Announcement. I stared at it longer than I needed to. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, already tense. "Hello?" My father's voice came through, flat and familiar. "You come to your senses yet?" I closed my eyes. "I'm at work." "You call that work?" He shot back. "You're still pretending." The word stuck. Pretending. We've noticed how some parents cling to that word when reality starts slipping away from them. "I have meetings." I told him, important ones. A short, humorless laugh. "Sure you do. Listen. Your mother thinks we should keep paying your phone until you get settled." "I don't see the point. You want to live on your own terms? You pay your own bills." "That's fine," I replied, surprised at how steady I sounded. "I'll handle it." Silence. Then, "Don't expect us to bail you out." "I'm not," I said, and meant it. The call ended without a goodbye. I set the phone face down on the desk and stared at the wall until the next meeting notification popped up. I straightened my shoulders and stood. There was work to do. The days after that call blurred together in a way that felt both fast and heavy. Mornings started early, not because anyone asked me to, but because my body refused to sleep past 5. I'd make coffee, stand at the counter, and scroll through messages while the city outside was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. At the office, everything was suddenly about timing. Legal wanted one more pass on the language. Finance flagged a clause that could turn into a problem later. Product sent an update about a minor outage overseas that had already been fixed but still needed explaining, just in case. Nothing's on fire, Mark from legal said during a call, rubbing his eyes. But we need to be precise. This goes public in less than 2 weeks. I know, I answered. That's why we're slowing down now. He nodded. Good call. Between meetings, I caught my reflection in the glass walls of the conference rooms. Same blazer, same hair pulled back. I looked like someone who knew what she was doing. I tried to let that version of me carry the rest. Late one night, after most of the floor had cleared out, I opened a new document on my laptop. I titled it, Things They Never Asked About. I didn't format it. No bullets at first, just lines. The first client I signed while still working a corporate job. The nights I slept on the couch because I didn't trust myself to stop coding if I went to bed. The medical bills I paid quietly last year so my mother wouldn't panic. The years I said we're doing okay instead of telling the truth. My phone buzzed while I was typing. Dad again. I stared at the screen for a second, then answered. You still in Texas? He opened, already irritated. Austin. I corrected. He ignored it. Your mother thinks this has gone far enough. She's worried. I'm working, I replied. Like I told you, a scoff. You've got an answer for everything now. I leaned back in my chair. I've always had answers. You just didn't like them. The line went quiet. We've heard that pause before, the one where someone realizes control is slipping, and they don't know which lever to pull next. You think you're too good for us now, he muttered. No, I said, keeping my voice even. I think I'm done shrinking so you feel comfortable. He hung up without another word. I added one more line to the document. They didn't just doubt me. They needed me to be small. I closed the laptop and sat there. Lights dimmed, the hum of the building around me. The announcement clock kept ticking, and for the first time, I didn't feel like running from it. The morning of the announcement felt quieter than it should have. No alarms, no last-minute fires, just a low, steady hum through the office as people took their seats and checked their screens. Someone passed me a coffee without asking. Someone else straightened the edge of the banner near the glass wall and stepped back. Squinting, You ready? Daniel asked, stopping by my door. As I'll ever be. He smiled, quick and tired. We're live in 10. I nodded and followed him down the hall. The conference space had been rearranged overnight. Chairs lined up, a camera on a tripod. The screen behind the podium showed our product dashboard, calm and clean, no numbers yet, just the interface. I stood off to the side and waited. My hands were steady. That surprised me. When it was time, I walked up and took my place. The lights were warmer than I expected. Someone in the front row gave me an encouraging nod. I recognized a few faces from the regional business segment. Familiar, but not personal. I talked about the work, about building tools that didn't get in the way, about teams spread across time zones who just wanted their day to run smoother. I mentioned growth, but kept it measured. High 8-figure annualized run rate, more than 60 people on the team, clients across the country and overseas. Nothing flashy, just true. When I finished, there was applause, not thunderous, solid, earned. As we stepped aside for the signing, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Cameras flashed, papers slid across the table, pens clicked. For a second, standing there, I felt it. The weight of it. Not pride exactly. Relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. We've learned that some moments don't announce themselves as turning points. They just change the air in the room. Afterward, people mingled. A reporter asked a question about expansion plans. Another asked how long the partnership had been in the works. Months. I answered, careful, honest. I slipped away once the crowd thinned and checked my phone. 3 missed calls, all from home. I didn't call back. Later that afternoon, as the clip started circulating, someone stopped by my office. "Hey, just a heads up," she said, leaning against the door frame. My aunt saw the segment. She asked if you were from Eastern Oregon. I let out a slow breath. "Yeah." She said it sounded familiar. "Thanks for telling me." When she left, I closed the door and sat down. The city outside kept moving. Cars, sirens, someone laughing on the sidewalk below. Somewhere, a television was on in a living room I hadn't slept in for years, and the truth was playing without me having to say a word. The first call came while I was still at my desk. Unknown number. Oregon area code. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. It rang again a minute later. Then again. I answered on the 4th try. Margot. My father didn't bother with a greeting. We saw it. I leaned back in my chair and watched the cursor blink on my screen. "Okay." "What was that?" He pressed, voice sharp. "That thing on television, a business announcement. You never told us it was like that." His words came fast now. 8 figures. All those people. You made us look stupid. That wasn't my goal. A breath on the line. My mother. I guessed. Close enough to hear, but not close enough to speak. "Your aunt called," he continued. "People are talking. I'm sure they are." Silence. Then, lower. "Why didn't you tell us the truth?" I closed my eyes. Every time I tried to explain my work, "You called it pretending." He scoffed, because it sounded like pretending. We've noticed how denial sharpens right before it cracks. "I have meetings," I said. "I can't do this right now." "You think this is something you can schedule?" He snapped. "This is family." I stood up and walked to the window. Family doesn't get to humiliate me and then demand access when it's convenient. Another pause. Longer this time. "We're coming down," he said finally. "We need to talk in person." "When?" "Soon." I didn't argue. I didn't invite them either. "Let me know when you're here." The line went dead. A few minutes later, a message came through from my sister. That was a lot to see on TV. I typed, erased, then typed again. "We can talk later." I set the phone face down and went back to my desk. Outside, the afternoon sun slid between buildings, bright and ordinary. Some conversations don't end. They just move closer. They showed up on a Tuesday, not announced, not invited, just there. I was walking past the front desk when I saw them through the glass, my father in his old work jacket, my mother clutching her purse like it might disappear, Lauren standing a step behind them, arms folded tight. They didn't look angry. They looked out of place. "Margot," my father called when he spotted me. Loud enough that a few heads turned, I stopped where I was, took a breath. "You made it." He stepped closer. "We need to talk. Now. Come with me." I nodded toward the small conference room off the main hall. Glass walls, no curtains, neutral chairs, a screen mounted on the far wall. My mother hesitated. Lauren followed without looking at anyone. Inside, my father crossed his arms. "I don't need a tour of your office. This isn't a tour." I set my bag down and picked up the remote from the table. "It's a conversation." "A conversation," he repeated. "After we find out about our own daughter on television." I connected my laptop. The screen lit up with a simple overview. No dashboards flashing, no theatrics. Just documents. "This is the partnership," I said, clicking once. "Negotiated over months, reviewed by legal on both sides." He squinted. That could be anything. I switched slides. Board-approved projections. Third-party review. The company's running at a high 8-figure annualized rate. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Lauren's eyes widened, then dropped to the floor. My father leaned forward, then straightened. "You think numbers on a screen explain why you hid this?" "I didn't hide it," I replied. I stopped explaining it to people who had already decided it wasn't real. "That's not fair," he snapped. "We're your family. And you told me to go live in the streets." My voice stayed calm. "You said this house wasn't my safety net. You said if I failed, it was on me." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I was trying to scare you into growing up." "I grew up," I said. "You just didn't notice. We've watched rooms like this shift before, not with yelling, but with the slow realization that control has already slipped away." Lauren finally spoke. "You made it sound like a hobby, because every time I mentioned it, someone laughed," I answered, or rolled their eyes, or told me to get a real job. My mother's voice shook. "We didn't know how to explain what you did to people. So you decided I wasn't worth explaining," I said. My father's jaw tightened. "You don't get to embarrass us like this." I met his eyes. "You don't get to humiliate me in private and then ask for discretion when the truth makes you uncomfortable." Silence filled the room. Outside the glass, someone walked past pretending not to look. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Money. An apology." I shook my head. "I want boundaries." His brow furrowed. "If you want to be in my life," I continued, "it starts with acknowledging what happened, not spinning it, not managing how it looks. If that's not possible, then this is where it stops." My mother reached for my arm. I stepped back, not unkindly. "Not today." I clicked the screen off and set the remote down. They stood there for a moment longer. Then my father turned toward the door without another word. Lauren paused on the way out. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I know," I answered. The glass door closed behind them. The office noise rushed back in. Phones ringing. Laughter. Life continuing. I picked up my bag and walked back to my desk. Hands steady. Heart loud. Knowing something had finally shifted and it wasn't going back. The days after they left didn't explode the way I thought they might. No dramatic emails. No public statements. Just small ripples moving outward, touching things I wasn't standing near anymore. Someone from my hometown messaged me on a platform I barely use. "Saw you on the news. Your dad must be proud." I didn't reply. Another note came from a former neighbor. "Guess that computer thing worked out after all." I muted the thread. At work, people were careful around me in a way that felt unnecessary. A few stopped by my desk just to ask if I needed anything. I told them I was fine, mostly because I was. Lauren called a week later. I was washing a mug when my phone lit up. Her name sat there longer than usual before I answered. "Hey," she started. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I didn't know how bad it was. I leaned against the counter and let the water run. "You knew enough." She didn't argue. I didn't know what to do. Dad always made it sound like you'd grow out of it. I grew into it. A breath on the line. People at the hospital keep bringing up that segment. They ask what you're really like. And I don't know how to answer without feeling like I missed something important. We've noticed how accountability often arrives quietly, without witnesses, long after the scene everyone remembers. "I'm not asking you to pick sides," she continued. I don't want to pretend nothing happened. That's a start." I said. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a while, phone face down, the apartment too quiet again. Different quiet this time. My parents tried once more. A few days later, an email from my mother. Long, careful, full of phrases like misunderstandings and hard choices. No mention of that night. No mention of the words that sent me out the door. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. That evening, I opened a blank message and kept it short. I wrote that I was open to a conversation that acknowledged what happened and how it affected me. I wrote that I wasn't interested in discussing money, reputation, or how my work reflected on the family. I ended with one line about respect. I didn't send it right away. I stared at the screen until my shoulders relaxed. Just a little. Then I hit send. The city outside hummed on, somewhere, Someone was laughing. Somewhere else. Someone was deciding whether silence was easier than accountability. I washed the mug and set it upside down to dry. A year passed without ceremony. No big markers. No clean moment where everything clicked into place. Just days stacking on top of each other until the space between that night in Oregon and my life now felt wider, steadier. Work stayed busy, not frantic, just solid. The kind of busy that lets you sleep. I moved apartments, not far. Same neighborhood, more light in the mornings. I stopped feeling guilty about that. My parents and I didn't talk much. My mother sent a message once that almost said what it needed to say, then swerved at the last second. I replied politely and didn't chase the rest. My father stayed quiet. That told me more than any apology would have. Lauren called every few months, sometimes to talk about nothing, sometimes to say she was still thinking about that day in the glass room. We didn't fix things. We didn't pretend either. That felt like progress. In early fall, I flew to Denver for a conference. Nothing flashy. A room full of founders, half tired, half hopeful. I spoke about building something slowly, about letting your work speak before you do. I didn't mention my family. I didn't need to. Afterward, a young woman waited until the line thinned. She twisted her badge between her fingers while she talked, eyes bright and scared at the same time. "I'm still at the beginning," she said. "People back home don't really get it." I nodded. They might not. She smiled, relieved by the simplicity of that answer, and walked away lighter than she'd arrived. Back in Austin. I sat on my balcony that night with a glass of water, city lights blinking on one by one. I thought about the house I grew up in, the porch light, the silence after the door closed. What surprised me wasn't that I'd survived it. It was that I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. Margot Sinclair doesn't live inside someone else's approval now. She doesn't shrink wins to keep rooms comfortable. She doesn't mistake endurance for love. That night taught me the difference between being wanted and being understood. And more importantly, it taught me that I could build a life without either, if I had to. We've listened quietly as Margot found her footing again, not louder, not harder, just clearer. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, you're welcome to leave a thought below. I'll be there, reading them, in the space that finally feels like mine.